Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci are arguably two of the most influential minds of the Italian Renaissance. Both of them are considered masters in their respective field of art. For Leonardo, that was oil painting, and Michelangelo, sculpting. Da Vinci worked from the late 15th century into the early 16th century, while Michelangelo worked up until his death in the late 16th century. So although Michelangelo was significantly younger than Leonardo, their careers overlapped significantly. And although there's no actual proof that the two Florentine artists met in person, sources such as Vasari and letters written by them confirm that they were aware of each other's works and that they were a part of an ongoing feud that lasted their entire careers. Now, Michelangelo despised Leonardo so much that even after Leonardo's death, Michelangelo wouldn't refer to the artist by his name and only refer to him as that man. Their feud was so well known, or is so well known, throughout art history that it even has its own name, paragone. This Italian word translates to comparison, which refers to the debate of which material of art is the more superior, sculpting or oil paint. And this was the root of the feud between Michelangelo and Leonardo. So in this video, what I will do is I will present both of their arguments from letters that they wrote to each other, as well as give examples of each of their works. And toward the end of the video, I will state what I believe to be the correct answer of the feud, which is a more superior form of art, painting or sculpting. So let's dive right in. So, first I would like to state the arguments made by each artist. I read and analyzed one letter by each artist, and I will just summarize them for now. Leonardo's argument, or his claim, is that sculpting isn't nearly as challenging as painting because a sculptor does not have to recreate the effects of light and color in nature, and painters do, and it's really difficult to do in painting. I actually paint, so I can vouch for that. It's very hard. Michelangelo's claim is that painting is basically a form of sculpting, which is kind of hard to explain or understand the concept of that, but it's easy to see in his works. He states that relief painting is the best form of painting. And for those who don't know, relief painting is a way of painting that depicts flat surfaces to appear three-dimensional, like three-dimensional architecture's features. The best example would be the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So, to recap, Michelangelo thinks that painting is just another form of sculpting. And I would also like to add a quotation from Michelangelo's letter. Michelangelo states, as to the man, referring to Leonardo, who wrote saying that painting was more noble than sculpting, if he had known as much about the other subject on which he had written, why, my serving maid would have written better. That's just a really amusing jab at the other artists, and it just goes to show that this was not just a scholarly debate between two masters in their field. These artists actually couldn't stand each other as people and as artists. We are first going to look at a painting entitled The Virgin of the Rocks by Leonardo da Vinci, which depicts the Virgin Mary, her child Jesus, baby St. John, and an angel. Leonardo was known for experimenting with oil paint and developing the oil painting technique called sfumato, which is applying thin layers of paint on top of one another to create a very cloudy and soft effect. As a result, there are no hard lines or hard contour lines defining his figures. They're all very soft and focus more on light than the lines. So, as I mentioned before, and as you could see, the painting depicts a group of figures. And the way he draws the figures is as a very large mass. And because there's no contour lines, it's hard to see or define the figures. So, when you look at the painting, it wasn't as if Leonardo was painting the figures themselves, but the space and the atmosphere around the figures, because he focused more on emphasizing the atmosphere, the color, and the light around the figures. He actually did 2 copies of this painting. He was really focused on pushing the potential of the oil paint to create the most realistic interpretation of nature as possible. On to Michelangelo. Now, Michelangelo only painted one other painting beside the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel, and that was the Doni Tondi for a family in Florence. Now, the Doni Tondi is a round painting depicting the Holy Family, so the Virgin Mary, St. John, and baby Jesus. So Michelangelo's painting style is very far from Leonardo's, and he did that on purpose to just further distinguish himself from the artist. First of all, he used tempera instead of oil, and tempera is an egg-based paint, which is very different from oil, and as a result, you can't create the same sfumato effect with tempera as you could with oil, and which was fine because Michelangelo did not want to copy Leonardo or do anything associated with Leonardo. And opposite of Leonardo, Michelangelo uses strong contrast and contour lines to emphasize each individual figure. Each figure is clearly defined. And Leonardo was focused on depicting nature. He wanted the image to look as realistic depiction of light, atmosphere, color as possible. Michelangelo is more concerned with the human figure. He was a sculptor. He sculpted human figures, so this was his main concern. And the anatomy of it is clearly amazing and just looks very realistic. He further emphasizes his skill with a group of male nudes in the background, as you can see. The male nudes serve no purpose in the painting to tell the story or have anything to do with the patron. They're just there to further emphasize Michelangelo's skill in depicting the human figure. Michelangelo's painting also has a very different color scheme than Leonardo's. Leonardo's is very foggy, a lot of browns and blues and darker tones. Michelangelo's is very bright colors, bright oranges, very beautiful. Similar color scheme to the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Now, in Vasari's biography of the artist, he states that Leonardo did in fact work in sculpture, particularly bronze sculpture. And in Leonardo's argument on sculpting, he stated that he did work in the medium. But when I was looking for sculptures by Leonardo, I couldn't really find any, except for the well-known equestrian statue that was planned. He planned to do an equestrian statue, but it was never completed. So, unfortunately, I have no sculptures of Leonardo's to look at. Michelangelo, on the other hand, produced many sculptures in his career, particularly in marble. And this time, we are going to look at one of his most famous sculptures, the David, because, as I stated before, Michelangelo's main goal was to depict the human body as perfectly as possible, and the David is really a good example of that. So the David is a larger-than-life male nude created out of one piece of dead marble, and by dead marble means it had a crack in it and other artists wouldn't use it, but Michelangelo was able to make a sculpture out of it. And big difference between marble and painting, beside the fact that painting is a two-dimensional art form and marble is three-dimensional, or sculpting's three-dimensional, is that sculpting is a much less forgiving medium. Meaning, painting, if you mess up, you could always paint over it. Sculpting, if you mess up, the piece of marble or whatever you're working with has no use and you have to start all over. And although there's no depiction of light or color, the naturalism and microscopic details in the sculpture are amazing. Just look at the marble. It's a piece of hard stone, and Michelangelo perfectly depicted the effects of soft flesh in the hair, and the textures are very convincing. Michelangelo and Leonardo were actually commissioned to do a project together by the Republic of Florence. The Republic of Florence hired both artists to each paint a wall of the main building in the piazza. And each wall was supposed to depict an important battle in Florence's history. So, the Republic of Florence actually did this on purpose. They knew that the artists had a competition between each other, and they thought that they would each have them do one wall, so it would encourage each of them to do their best work. These competitions between rival artists were very common during the Renaissance. Unfortunately, the frescoes were never started, and the only thing that remains are copies of their original sketches. So we'll look at those. Leonardo depicted the Battle of Anghiari, and his drawing is very similar to his Virgin of the Rocks in that the subject matter is depicted as one large mass of figures. There's no space in between them. It's hard to define which from which. But in that, there's also the same emphasis on light and perspective and motion. You could tell that everything's moving around. It's very chaotic. It's well depicted. And also the emotion and the fear in the faces of the figures, there's a huge emphasis on that. Michelangelo depicts the Battle of Cascini, and he shows a group of soldiers bathing, being ambushed by another group of soldiers. So, once again, they're all male nudes, which is a common theme in Michelangelo's works. And just like his painting, there's strong emphasis on the individual figures, the individual male figures, and their anatomy as well depicted. Once again, it's all to showcase Michelangelo's skill in depicting the human form. And now, after looking at all their works, I have a pretty strong idea of whose side of the argument I'm going to take. But first, let's do a recap. Leonardo da Vinci was a pioneer in oil paint, and his numerous studies of nature and science really pushed the boundaries and the realism of his paintings, and they are absolutely amazing. He used his paintings to create windows and life figures, such as the Mona Lisa. Again, really beautiful. Back to Leonardo's main argument, which is that painting was much harder because painters had to depict light and color, while sculptors did not. But the way I see it is that sculptors have an even bigger challenge because they cannot use color and light to help them create a realistic interpretation of life. And Michelangelo has proven through pieces like the David, the Pietà, that he's able to create forms out of hard marble that just look like they're breathing and change the textures to soft, fleshy ones or soft cloth ones. Furthermore, I also paint, and I paint specifically in oil. So I understand how to use the medium, and it's very forgiving. It doesn't dry fast, so if I make a mistake, I can always wipe it off. But I've never worked in marble or any type of sculpture, and I'm sure that's very hard and would require so many more years of practice. So, from an artist's perspective, I could see how marble or sculpting would be so much more challenging, and I also find it amazing how anybody can do anything with marble, specifically what Michelangelo did. So I believe Michelangelo won the Perugina, but once again, this is only my opinion, and this has been a scholarly debate among art historians ever since Michelangelo and Leonardo were painting, and it's still debated now. So that's just my opinion, and I hope this video has inspired you to go look at their pieces of art and come up with your own opinion on what you think is the more superior form of art, sculpting or painting.